Welcome to this talk on visualization-based scrollytelling of coupled threads for biodiversity, species and music cultures. My name is Jakob Kusnick and I'm delighted to have this chance to present our research here today at the NBRVIS this year. Our main drive is to demonstrate the intrinsic link and interdependence between music and nature. We are captivated by the musical instruments and the materials which originate from the natural resources found in the ecosystems of our planet and the diverse species living in them. This connection is particularly evident on stage, especially in large ensembles such as orchestras, where a wide variety of musical instruments and species are present. Our motivation for storytelling lies in unraveling these connections by sharing specific examples that allow us to convey the hidden narratives behind them and take some steps towards a more sustainable and harmonic orchestra ecosystem. To do so, we bring together following scientific and practical domains, namely ecology and biology, geography, instrument making, musicology, material science, and computer science. We work together in a user-centered participatory and iterative visualization design process within our core team of a computer scientist in a design by immersion approach together with geographer Silke Lichtenberg, who is also a violin maker. Additionally, our decisions are based on findings of the long-lasting collaboration with our co-creation team and external domain experts from the creation of MusEcology, which is an interlinked multiple view visualization and decision support system which is in submission right now using following data. We use the Western Symphony Orchestra as a well-known symbol of the music culture with their instrument groups and instruments. High valuable and professional musical instruments are potentially made of a set of natural materials originating from plant and animal species. They, on the other side, can be organized in the hierarchical, nested taxonomy of genus, family and kingdom. This mapping of instrument parts to species is based on findings by a survey of instrument makers and literature research. These species are assessed regarding their ecological threats by, for example, the IUCN Red List, and derived from them are trade regulations by CITES. We use these various red levels to depict the species threat in glyphs either by icons for single or donut charts for sets of species. To get information about the distribution of these species, we use range maps coming from different repositories including IUCN or the Botanic Garden Conservation International (BGCI) within various geographical boundaries. Additionally, to contextualize through cultural data, we are using locations of orchestras worldwide. And we add material photos for the so important visual appearance of the material and species by wood libraries and Wikimedia. Similar to TreeX, to visualize the distribution and threat of the species, we use a choropleth heat map of national boundaries with statistical glyphs for the threat levels on top of them. But to get a better estimation of ranges of these species, we use the 846 ecoregions by Dynastin et al. And cluster point-wise observations into hexagonal tile maps like McNeil and Hale. To depict the historic development of threat levels of species, we use timelines. And here we see already a foreshadowing of characteristics of storytelling, because in this timeline by Newman, we see the changing circumstances of Japanese beetles throughout the year. Using this visualization, in addition to hierarchical visualization, such as a schematic orchestra and tree map for material photos, to create familiarity and interest, we created a musicology tool as a system for experts. But problems and solution pathways have to reach the people who are affected to get some relevance. So to reach out of our scientific bubble, many of our thoughts went into lowering the hurdles for non-expert users who might be not trained to work with interactive nested visualizations based on scientific findings. We thought about onboarding techniques like tutorials, videos, or use cases, and end up with the urge for using storytelling for that. Nowadays, storytelling techniques are more and more used to create informative and memorable visualizations. Tonga Dahl created a survey reporting on the state of storytelling and visualizations. And here again we see different circumstances throughout the story by interactions such as filtering or aggregation of data points. Scrollytelling is just one technical implementation of visualization-based storytelling, where the main interaction within the visualization and throughout the story thread is scrolling, which is considered as very intuitive, and it is widely used in social media or online articles, like here on top of a map telling about the illegal logging by the wood mafia around the Carpathians. Which leads us to the Scrollytelling with MusEcology, where we combine the existing data, visualizations and interactions with multimedia content chunks to scrollable story paragraphs. For linear Scrollytelling for desktop and mobile devices, implemented with JavaScript libraries like React, Mapbox and D3. So let us have a look into one of our stories, the story of string instrument bows, where we start in the hall of the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. We decided for a static 2-column layout consisting of an interactive map on the left side and a scrollable content on the right. With the start of the music, the lights get dimmed and we are following the orchestra on one of its flights to the Carnegie Hall in New York. To convey an impression of the distances, the orchestra is traveling for their concerts abroad. And we are playing a sound recording to let the user immerse even more into the story. Afterwards, we're zooming out again to get an overview of the orchestras worldwide as heat map and clustered glyphs, and observe that most of them are based on the Northern Hemisphere. We are also introducing the orchestra view on the right side with the different instrument groups. Afterwards, we are connecting the instruments with the set of species used for them in the orchestra view and map, and see that significant more of them are originating from the Southern Hemisphere. Afterwards, we can also detect an increase of ecological threat to the species from north to south, while we are explaining these threat levels and assessments and their connections to the orchestra, which is, as you can see, hierarchical nested, so that the user can zoom in to see the underlying instruments when the map is updated accordingly. Afterwards, we are focusing again on the string instrument group, where we can see that we divided the bow from the rest of the instruments. To underline the importance of the bow, we present a quote by a famous violinist stating, "The bow, that's the violin." While we are explaining the instrument bow and its materials in detail, we focus on the wooden bow stick, for which the majority of wood species is located in Brazil. This also holds true for pau-brasil, which is the national tree of Brazil and has a very bendable and red wood. Within the Wikimedia photos you can already find the instrument bow again. Because of its special characteristics, it was and is considered the perfect material for high-value bows. And violinists say that it really makes a difference. The spiked and yellow blooming tree has a very exclusive preference to live within the Mata Atlântica along the coast of Brazil, an extraordinary rich and diverse but also highly endangered ecosystem. Through the hexagons we get an estimation of the distribution of the tree, but because it was widely used as a red dye in Europe since the colonization in the 16th century, only a few small protected areas, here in yellow, with the actual wood are present in the nature. Because of its extensive exploitation and the later use for string instrument bows, logging, trade and even travel of pau-brasil wood is highly regulated by CITES, where it is actually on the second level of 3, so Appendix 2. Through the slider on top of the timeline, we can observe the historic threat assessments for all materials used for the bow stick worldwide. We further report on the ongoing illegal exploitation and seizures of thousands of bow stick slugs by the Brazilian police, of course in one of the small protected areas of the National Park of Pau-Brasil. We further discuss the international trade by Brazil and the negotiations on the CITES conference of parties in Panama last November, where it was discussed to raise the regulation level for Pau-Brasil to protect it even more. We end with open questions regarding the possible following consequences for musicians, instrument makers, and the music culture, and go back to the Vienna Orchestra Hall and report from a violin workshop to show possible future pathways towards a more harmonic orchestra ecosystem. To evaluate the intuitiveness and outreach of our method and story, we did a survey with 19 non-experts and asked them to rate the experience. Nearly all users confirmed to have learned something new through the story. Whether it was the materials, illegal trades, or the storytelling techniques in general. Most of them gave useful feedback, and we summarized this into following observations. The story must be carefully introduced at the beginning. The relation between visualization and content has to be clear. Visualization and content need to be balanced. There has to be a red thread between two subsequent story items, and using rich media like sound and video enhances the experience. Although we try to include the feedback, we still encounter some limitations and challenges. First of all, we don't have a visual editor to create the stories yet. So far, our approach depends on JSON notation to define the story paragraphs, which can be sent to the server to render the story. We also are limited to linear storytelling because we want to carefully introduce the complex problem and tools, even though the interactive visualization create possibilities for explorative pauses. Furthermore, we encounter difficulties with specific scientific findings on musical instruments regarding their used materials and species, especially because instrument makers tend to prefer common trade names instead of the scientific Latin names. This is why we also included the possibilities to search for common names in different languages. And of course, so far we are limited by our data to the instruments of a Western orchestra and the organic material used for musical instrument, because extensions and stories on metals, plastics, and mining for further instruments such as brasses could be tempting. But even already we find this Scrollytelling technique a good way for science communication and outreach opportunity to casual users. The stories act as introduction and use cases for complex interconnected systems, problems, but also nested and interactive visualizations. We always thought about musicology as a platform, and through the storytelling it is even easier to discover new research aspects and encourage interdisciplinary collaboration and change of perspectives. And it is meant as incentive for new collaborations and the opening of new inter- and transdisciplinary research areas. Which leads me to future stories. Of course, we could tell stories for each of the instrument groups. We can even ask the user for their favorite instrument and let them discover from which areas and species and materials originate from. We could focus on specific taxonomic levels, such as the genus or the Oftaberia, which is extremely diverse but already entirely listed on Appendix 2 by CITES. We could highlight the animal species, or focus on the marine wildlife such as the turtle and their ecosystems. And we were happy to tell stories on specific music relevant characteristics of regions, such as the Alps or Carpathians within a concert on an opera stage. Because even if the species within these regions aren't listed as threatened, so the environment still could be. This is why we include the protection potential of ecoregions to get an estimate of future projection regarding overexploitation or climate change. And through these ecoregions, we can even include species not used for musical instruments, living in them as characters for our stories. And of course, we shouldn't forget about the human species, because various people are living in these ecosystems, and they're living off the ecosystems, like these wood farmers here in Madagascar, or the professional musicians on stage living off the species in form of the instruments, performing music for casual users and domain experts within the audience. Which leads me to thank you for your attention.